Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome to a very special tournament that started yesterday. Welcome to the European Club Cup in 2022. So this is now really a brilliant chess event because we'll see now many grandmasters, many intermasters, many FIDE masters battling it out for their club. So it's sort of a match battle, and in order to win some games you have to also rely on the strength of your teammates. You cannot just win, of course, match games by winning your own games. So here we'll see really beautiful tactical battles, really sharp attacks, and among many great players, among more than 150 players. Also the world champion Magnus Carlsen is playing here, which is really wild to see. Magnus Carlsen among 150 and more players. Usually we see Magnus Carlsen only playing maybe in this top events where 10, 12, maybe sometimes even 15 players are invited, but now here Magnus Carlsen is just one piece out of more than 150 players. So really remarkable thing to see. And yesterday Magnus Carlsen didn't start in the best way. He only played a draw against a much lower rated player. The problem about the Magnus Carlsen's draws is that he loses also rating points when he plays a draw. That's, I think, the main issue, because his rating is so much higher than the ratings of other players. So it's really wild to see Magnus Carlsen plays a draw and then you lose 3-4 sometimes even rating points. Really wild stuff. So let's see now the second game played by Magnus. Again, he played against a much lower rated player. The rating difference is about 350 rating points. His opponent was Alexander Naumann from Germany, and he's around 2500 rated. So it's now really time for Magnus Carlsen to make something out of this. If he again plays the draw, he would probably again lose 3 or 4 rating points. So let's see now the game. Magnus Carlsen against Alexander Naumann in a beautiful Scotch game. So here we have e4 played by Magnus, we have e5 by Naumann, knight to f3, knight to c6, and after move d4 we have now the wildest opening in the early stage of the game, d4. The Scotch game, the open game, is on the board, and I was really surprised to see Magnus playing the Scotch, because he doesn't have so many games in the database with this particular move order. And okay, he played, for instance, a game against Levan Aronian, but he didn't try it out so many times. He tried many times Rui Lopez, Italian games, and similar stuff. But okay, let's see now this open battle. So e takes d4, knight takes d4, and after move knight to f6, attacking now the pawn on e4. You can go, of course, here with the move knight to c3. This would be now the so-called Schmidt variation. But after move knight takes c6, we have b takes c6 and e5. This is now the so-called Mieses variation. And the idea is clear. White is having, of course, in the beginning the space advantage in the center of the board, but the downside about this move e5 is actually that the pawn on e5 can be also strategic weakness. So basically it's a battle immediately for the e5 square. This pawn, as I said, can be an advantage, but it can be also disadvantage, so you have to be careful if you're playing this wild open line. So in the continuation, queen to e7, preventing, of course, e takes f6, because the king is lined up here on the e file. So we have queen to e2, Magnus protects the pawn. We have now knight takes d5, and now a very interesting choice already by Magnus Carlsen. He plays now the move knight to d2, and in my opinion this is sort of a surprise element. This is maybe even not the most suggested top move by some agents and also in chess theory. The main line here is of course to play something like c4, then you get this one, bishop to a6 and similar stuff, then you fix the pawn structure with the move b3, and okay, the game is going on. But with the move knight to d2, you are trying to reroute your knight here on f3, support the knight, and play maybe even bishop to f4 if necessary. Maybe even queenside castling is an option, then to maybe just launch a flank attack if possible with g4, h4, if for instance black castles now on the king side. But the knight to d2, as I said, already surprise element here by Magnus. Here Alexander Naumann played knight to f4, attacking the queen, and basically you have only two choices. You can play queen to e3 or queen to e4. If queen to e4, then the downside about this move is that actually here knight to g6, the pawn on e4 is hanging. Now you have to play f4, but now with d5 or d6, still of course white is challenged here. Still black at least has this advantage on the queen side, kicks away the queen, and now after something like queen to a4, black would play probably something like bishop to d7 with the idea maybe to play the move c5. But okay, here in the continuation, queen to e3 was played by Magnus, so he played this move where he's still attacking the knight. And in the continuation, we have now knight to d5 by Alexander Naumann. You could also play maybe here now knight to g6, but now with the move f4 again, white should be slightly better, fixing simply the pawn structure here in the center of the board. Again, black could break the position with the potential d6 move. But okay, here Alexander Naumann decided to play knight to d5, again creating a tempo against the queen. We have queen to e4 and now f6. Here Naumann breaks the position again with this move. Also notice that you can do the same thing also with the move d6. So in the continuation, now finally c4 was played by Magnus Carlsen. So we had a little bit different move, or as I said, but the tactical motifs are basically the same. Again, we have this idea to kick away the knight from the center of the board. So now Alexander Naumann plays knight to b4, and notice now that when the queens are off the board, if you play for instance something like here e takes f6, then it wouldn't be good because of the queen to e4, knight takes e4, you get the fork on c2. That's the main tactical threat here. So that's why Magnus Carlsen has to be careful. After move knight to b4, Magnus went to wild line, really sick, brutal line by Magnus Carlsen. He played now king to d1, and he lost of course the privilege of castling. His king is centralized. But when we watch now a little bit this position more, it's not such a strange idea, because we have to notice actually the activity about the bishop pair here. Magnus Carlsen needs only one move, maybe knight to f3 or maybe knight to b3, doesn't matter. Imagine just the position where the knight moves somewhere, but with this move of course the bishop gets liberated, and both of these bishops actually would play in the game. On the other hand, black's bishops are not good. Still, you have many moves in order to improve the bishop here. So actually, in my opinion, it's not such a strange idea, because probably the queens will be also off the board, and that's very important to say. The king is not so endangered in the center of the board when the queens are off the board, because the game is not so tactical anymore. And that's why I think I really loved here this choice by Magnus Carlsen to go into this line, because it creates already a tactical man. So in the continuation, we have queen to e5, okay, a3, kicking away the knight. We have queen takes e4, knight to e4, and now knight to a6, and here Magnus pulled off b4. And okay, in this tactical sequence, Magnus Carlsen lost the pawn, but notice now that actually white pieces are much better. Bishop is active. This bishop is aiming against the knight, so actually the knight is a little bit also hanging here on a6. In the near future, we can play king to c2, maybe rook to d1, maybe include this other rook into the game, rook to e1. So white will be very fast in development, although white lost the pawn, but I think in the near future we can build here a beautiful attacking formation. So now after move b4, here comes the first, in my opinion, critical moment of the game. Here Alexander Naumann plays an inaccuracy in the opening. He plays now the move c5. He's trying to break the position in the center of the board. He's trying of course to include the bishop into the game, and that was now his huge mistake, because Magnus pulled off the move b5. The knight has to move now. Of course here Alexander Naumann counterattack, but now after bishop to d3, you have to play with your knight, and look at this, the knight is out of game. The knight is really paralyzed by this pawn on b5. Let's go back. If instead of this move c5, you have to play here knight to b8 immediately, because the main threat, I think, what white could do is of course the move b5, but b5 is not working now anymore. Notice now that white didn't gain a tempo against the knight. Now we simply take c takes b5, c takes b5, and notice now with the move d5 we're kicking away the queen, knight to c3, and notice now at least the knight will come into the game. Knight to d7, knight to c5, or maybe knight to d7, knight to e5, but at least the knight is coming into the game. And here black is still the position where black is up opponent. In my opinion, this should be perfectly fine. So as I said, knight to b8 was the way to go. What you could do of course is play bishop to f4, but again we play d6, and notice now that we have at least the opportunity to again get with the knight into the game. But after move c5, that was now the main issue here. In the continuation we have now b5, and from this point on the knight is paralyzed. The problem here after move b4, knight to b8, as I said, was the correct move. You cannot even play the move d5. I've also analyzed this move at home. I was very curious why black didn't play the move d5. Then it becomes really wild. Notice that now, as I said, the bishop is aiming against the knight. Look at this, c takes d5, c takes d5. Now I get bishop to b5. You have to bring something in between. If you play bishop to d7, okay, both pieces are hanging, but now we play knight takes f6. Look at this, e takes f6. Now rook to e1, and now finding the next move will simply grab the knight, and here white is much better. So you see, one single move caused now many problems here. Rook knight to b8 would be perfectly fine in Naumann's position, but he played c5, as we said, b5, and now after move knight to b8, here bishop to b7, bishop to d3, knight to b8, the knight gets paralyzed. The knight is simply out of game because of this annoying pawn. So we have rook to e1. Here are some discovered threats, knight to f6 and similar stuff, so you have to get out of this e-file mess. We have knight to c3. Magnus is targeting now here the weak d5 square. The problem here for black is that you cannot take here the pawn on g2, because you get this one, bishop to f4. This pawn is hanging, and if you try something like d6, then bishop to f5 is going to happen, and now there's simply no good play against bishop to e6. For instance, you play g6, bishop to e6, you have only one square, and look at this, now the knight is coming into the game. You cannot even do something like this, bishop to d5, c6 will simply take it out. So too many tactical damage here. The game is over here for black. So you see, you don't have time to take out the pawn on g2. It was a really dirty trap that Magnus Carlsen prepared here. So that's why after move knight to c3 here, Alexander Naumann played bishop to d6. He's preventing now this idea, bishop to f4. But still, Magnus continues with f4. We have now bishop to g2. It's a different story now, because as we said, bishop to f4 was then the move, then d6. When d6 happened, we saw that bishop to f5, bishop to e6 caused now many tactical problems. But now Magnus goes king to c2, and from this point on, actually it's an equal game. Okay, Magnus Carlsen lost 2 pawns, but still he has this annoying pawn on b5 that restricts the knight's ability to play. That's, I think, now the main strength. And here Alexander Naumann has many choices. In my opinion, he has to play now the move a6. He has to break here the position around the square b5. So now maybe white would play a4, bishop to b7, maybe retreating. Then okay, white can get some spaces here on the king side. But now with c6, black should actually continue to push here around the square b5 and eventually try to somehow get out of this, get out with the knight here, maybe on d7. But here Alexander Naumann, instead of this move a6 or c6 that he could have played, he played g6. And notice now that this move is opening now the diagonal here for the Darsko bishop against the rook on h8, and that's now the main issue. Magnus sends some blood immediately and plays now bishop to b2. Now in the continuation, there are again many things, but again I think a6 with then followed with c6. As I said, bishop to b7, c6, again with the same motif. You have to break here simply the main advantage of whites, and that's, I think, the b5 pawn. You have to break it. You have to open the position on the queen side. Here Alexander Naumann got again trapped, fell into a dirty trap here by Magnus Carlsen. Here Alexander Naumann took the pawn on f4, but this was now his main mistake, because notice now the bishop get lined up with the king here on the f file, and that's now a huge problem. Magnus Carlsen played here really in a beautiful, brilliant way. He played first a rook to e2. We have now bishop to b7. You have to retreat, but now rook to f1. For instance, of course, bishop to f3 doesn't make sense. Still you have rook to f2, so both of your bishops will be lined up on the f file, so you lose one of them for sure. So that's why you have to play bishop to b7. But notice now a rook to f1 is coming into the game, and now there is not a good way anymore to protect the bishop. If you retreat, of course, with something like bishop to h6, then you get knight to d5. Look at this, the position opens here simply around the square f6, so it's game over. So that's why after move rook to f1, here Alexander Naumann played g5. He's trying to somehow keep the bishop here on the f file in order to close the f file, because the f6 square is now the main target of white. But Magnus Carlsen is breaking the position further. He plays now the move h4, and let's see possible continuations. Again, you could try maybe h6 to paralyze the position further to keep the position compact on the king side. But now with knight to d5, knight to e4, pardon me, the knight is coming into the game. If you trade it off, of course, then you're vulnerable on light course here. If you try something like rook to e8, maybe including the rook into the game, then you get this one, knight to f6, and this is now a devastating position now for black. So you can maybe trade it off, bishop to e2, d6, but now look at this bishop is coming into the game again, a messed up here position for black. So after move h4, what Naumann tried, he tried d6 to finally get this knight into the game with the knight to d7, knight to e5, but it's not working because Magnus played, of course, h takes g5, and there are now two choices. You can play, of course, f takes g5. This wasn't played in the game. Bishop to e5 was played, but let's see now. If you play f takes g5, it's not getting better. Bishop to e4, again attacking the light course, bishop to e4, knight to e4, and look at this now, the rook is hanging here on h8. There's no counterplay against this kind of attack. If you retreat with the rook, then of course we have here this possibility, knight to g5, a beautiful check, and here you simply take out the bishop, you simply take out the rook again. It's game over here for black. So after move h takes g5 here, Naumann tried bishop to e5, which makes really sense because now the bishop is at least standing in the way of the dark square bishop on b2. But again, this motif, knight to e4, we have knight to d7 here by Naumann. He's trying now to get the knight into the game, but it's simply too slow. Knight to f6, we have knight takes f6, we have bishop to e5, d takes e5, rook to e5, and in this position Naumann resigned because he will lose eventually also the knight on f6. The problem is now, if you make a continuation like this, rook to e8, we still can take out this one, and eventually you lose, of course, the knight on f6. This is a weakness, so it's a position that I think you have to resign. So really wild game by Magnus Carlsen. He played really an open Scotch game, really beautiful tactical shots. We have seen a really brilliant attack by the world champion, and as I said, although he played here brilliantly, he didn't gain so many rating points here. He got the 1 rating point out of this game, so he still lost many rating points in this event, although he has 1/2 points out of the possible 2 points. So that's now the life of a world champion like this. His rating is simply too high. I hope he can get his rating back maybe in some other games in the super event, but we'll follow his career for sure. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Scotch for sure. There were also surprise elements by Magnus Carlsen, like this opening move knight to d2, really surprise element for sure. If you want to see more of this beautiful commented chess games like this, check out my series so far. Here's the link of our playlist, and if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.